I want to reflect on an anniversary which is in many of our minds. 3 years since the shootings in Pittsburgh, killing 11 people, 11 Jewish people who were specifically targeted for being Jews. When I became a rabbi back in the 1990s, I and many of my colleagues were determined that we were not going to primarily focus on suffering and on danger. We were going to focus primarily on the joy of being Jewish and on what we can contribute, not just to the Jewish people, but to all of humankind. And many of us would encapsulate that in a cute way by saying that we wanted to embrace more joy and less oi. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of oi in the world. Unfortunately, there still is hatred that targets many people for many different reasons, and anti-Semitism is a very large portion of the hatred that people experience in this world. I'm going to quote a statistic that you might find surprising and perhaps even scary. Of all hate crimes perpetrated against another person for religious reasons, meaning someone is targeted for their religion, nearly 6 out of 10 are perpetrated against Jews. That is a staggering statistic when you consider that the percentage of Jews in this country is far, far smaller than that. There is a huge gap between the way that Jews perceive the danger of anti-Semitism in the United States, I'll speak about this country, and the way that people outside of the Jewish community perceive it. So 90% of Jews who were surveyed recently by the American Jewish Community believe that anti-Semitism is a problem, and 60% of people from the general population believe that it is a problem. Amazing, horrifying that in the United States of America, where Jewish people have achieved so much in terms of accomplishments and influence, that somebody can walk into a synagogue and start shooting and have the hatred and the capacity to be able to wreak such terror and such damage. In the United States, 1 out of 4 American Jews have been targeted by anti-Semitism in the past year. In person, 17%, online, 12%. Now, I usually don't quote statistics. I usually prefer to speak about concepts, to share stories, but the statistics are important. John Adams famously said that facts are stubborn things. So we need to quote statistics so that people understand that this is not a figment of anybody's imagination. And so what do we do about this? How do we navigate those of us who are concerned, either because we ourselves are the targets or because we are people of goodwill who want to make sure that nobody is targeted for who they are? So the first thing is we have to be forthright about where the danger is coming from. So I want to say in this space forthrightly that the danger of anti-Semitism is coming from the right and it is coming from the left. No matter our own ideological leanings, we have to be forthright about recognizing both sources of anti-Semitism. So it is coming from the right. The murderer of Jews in Pittsburgh was a white supremacist, is a white supremacist, as were the unmasked marchers in Charlottesville. They didn't even have masks on their faces. They didn't feel like they needed to hide as they were chanting, "Jews will not replace us." No matter our ideological leanings, we need to be forthright about the reality of anti-Semitism coming from the left. Our students on college campuses across the country are experiencing exclusion from progressive groups if they themselves identify with groups that are supportive of Israel. And so we need to say forthrightly that while criticism of Israel can be legitimate, denial of Israel's right to exist is anti-Semitism. Demonizing and delegitimizing and holding Israel to a double standard is anti-Semitism. And this type of anti-Semitism strengthens the resolve of our enemies. Hamas knows that they can attack Israel because in the court of world opinion, there are many people who will say that Israel does not have a right to exist and to protect herself as a Jewish defined state. We have to be forthright about calling it out, whether it comes from the left or the right or the center. We have to be forthright about calling it out, whether the victims look like us or are Haredi or are secular. It doesn't matter who the perpetrator is. It doesn't matter who the victim is. When anti-Semitism is at work, we have to be forthright about identifying it and telling the whole story. Now, the second outgrowth of what it is that we need to do is that we need to educate forthrightly, not just identify what the issues are, but educate forthrightly. I just want to share again in this space that there are a number of efforts that are taking place nationwide and efforts within our very own community. So this past Tuesday, our community, Great Neck's United Parent Teacher Council, Total Community Involvement co-chairs, Moji Pormarati and Kevin Sun, sponsored an evening of education for the community that took place in our Great Neck North High School. I was there with a number of Temple Israel students. It was co-chaired by Judy Lyman and Laura Beth Schwartz. And a centerpiece of the evening was a summary of the nature and causes of anti-Semitism by a professor at Stony Brook, Sarah Lipton. It was a very important evening. Very important for people within and outside of the Jewish community to understand what is happening. So forthright is about recognizing the causes. Forthright is about educating. Forthright is also about recognizing and stating that anti-Semitism as a form of hatred requires no less direct recognition and no less direct response than any other form of hatred, which means that Jews matter as much as anybody else. We have to be able to say that wherever we live and wherever anti-Semitism is a threat. We also have to recognize that we need allies, and we need to find allies, not just within the Jewish community, but allies are outside of the Jewish community that we can partner with and support each other. A nation, a community that suffers from anti-Semitism will also suffer from racism and xenophobia and misogyny and homophobia. None of this sorts independently. People who hate indiscriminately. It may start with us, it never ends with us. If it doesn't start with us, it usually reaches us, which is why we have to find allies, and which is why we need to partner with decent people of all backgrounds of goodwill that are looking to speak out against hatred. I want to conclude my thoughts by taking us back now thousands of years. And we are reading about how Abraham, after the death of his wife, wanted to make sure that he had a burial plot for the family. So he went to the Hittites who were in charge, and he said something which was very interesting, a really interesting way for him to describe himself. He said to them, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. I am a stranger and an inhabitant among you. Both, I am a stranger and I am an inhabitant. And I think that it reflected a dual sense of being on the outside, but also being a full-fledged participant. We need to be thoughtful and reflective. I believe that Jews in the United States may live at times with the sense that we are, to paraphrase Evan Hansen, on the outside looking in. But I want to urge us to forthrightly claim our rights and to feel and to project our identity as full inhabitants, citizens, participants in every aspect of our great communities and this great nation. So on the third anniversary of this tragic event in the United States, and there were others like it as well that followed, On the 3,000 plus anniversary of Abraham stepping out into this land and asserting himself as he should have done, with some ambivalence, but ultimately with self-affirmation, I offer the following prayer. May we have the insight and the courage to advocate for ourselves, to advocate for education that exposes the realities and the causes of anti-Semitism, to join with allies who can support us as we support them, with the goal of strengthening our community and our nation as a place of liberty and justice for all. Like Abraham, we may at times feel like gerim, like strangers. We're not alone. Many in this great nation of ours feel like they don't belong at times, but like Abraham, we have to strengthen our resolve as toshavim, as inhabitants of this community, inhabitants of this great land, inhabitants who see themselves as Abraham did, as being a source of blessing to kol mishpachot ha'adama, to all of the families of the earth. There is much to be feared, but if we are forthright, we can continue to take our rightful place as participants, not only in this nation, but in all of the nations of the earth. Amen.